Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
These are patriotic Canadians.
Oh my God!
You're now attacking different older people.
You guys are disgusting!
Look at the fucking nuke right here. Look. Look. You coward! You sound your
Lives on the line. We have nowhere else to go.
My phone dropped.
Practicing
Stay back there.
I hope it wasn't.
Anybody with us? I see you shaking your head back there. You should be watching this. Take a lesson in courage.
Man, they declared this called the Crusade.
Cowards!
Nazi supporters.
Child generation theory. Every generation. Law enforcement professionals, huh?
Oh, you got blown up in Afghanistan, eh? And these guys are going to arrest you and push you back when you serve for your country?
Right, you guys keep those mentions. Resign everybody else to serve them. Go for it.
Maybe for me. I don't smoke. I'm dying. Children. You don't know my life. You don't know my struggle. I fought for my shit. I survived the worst. This is nothing.
Tell your boss to stop it, huh?
I've been
Follow
blown
the
up.
law.
Peace and love. And if
No
you think
respect
he
for
does,
human dignity
you're wrong.
whatsoever. We're not livestock to make rich boomers. All serial killers are boomers. I almost said that.
We love you all.
All they want is to be heard.
Can you take a second?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I need a minute.
You are not a surf.
I did surfing once.
We want to
oh
do
man, I
the
hurt myself there
SURF
too.
thing.
No, you don't want to go SERF. That's
Oh,
what
no,
these guys
I-
want you to do. They want you to go SERF.
Oh,
Nuremberg 2, boys. Can't wait to see you there.
I don't want to be here.
You guys' grandchildren are going to be born
I'm not
into
trying to be
debt,
home with my wife and kids.
owing a piece of their lives to the state. That's a wounded veteran!
Yes!
That's a wounded veteran!
Yes!
That's a wounded warrior right there! They got a shield in his fucking head! Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up!
Hold on, stop pushing.
Back up! They kicked him in the leg.
Back up, back up. Hold on, stop pushing.
They kicked him in the leg. The RCR guy. They booted him. That was weird. Here's the one. The one who booted him was this one. Couture Lazon. He kicked the vet that had the wounded right leg. He kicked him right in the leg. Oh, he's a greasy one. This guy right here. Couture Lazon. He kicked him.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Saw you kicking that wounded veteran while he was down there earlier. You guys are a bunch of thugs, huh?
Didn't want freedom would stop everybody from having
No, not at all. You want to keep the rich guys in power right now, huh? Soaking up all the wealth, buying up all those residential properties, turning the millennials into a bunch of permanent renters, reaching into the pockets of the unborn, deciding all future children to be born into serfdom. That's you guys abusing your citizens, huh?
I am the media now.
Just following orders, just like those guards at the ovens of Auschwitz. That's you,
Those connections are getting up for all of our friends here.
right? You just do as you're told, right?
Tu vois, moi, j'ai pas la même opinion.
These guys are getting in.
Hey, what's up, troops? This is Jeff Evely, Ops Sgt-Maj with Veterans for Freedom, back with you now here on this 11th day of January 2023. And as usual, there's all kinds of things going on in the world today, so I think we'll just go ahead and dive right into this. So, let me get this up there for you. So, here's our philosophy meme of the day. Pardon me. Okay, here's our philosophy meme of the day. This is Aldous Huxley. I talk about Huxley quite a bit on the program here. I think his most famous work would probably be Brave New World. And if you haven't read that, then go give that a read, because there are so many parallels that can be drawn with what's going on here in the world today. He tended to focus more on the people who were in the echo chamber in Brave New World. So basically what ends up happening in tyrannies is we end up with these isolated and out of touch elites who, don't accept bad news coming from the grassroots. And, this is what happens in tyranny is the people at the top kind of end up in a position where they're out of touch, and nobody really wants to come to them with information, because in the case of Xi Jinping, he might kill you or throw you in prison, this sort of thing. And in Brave New World, what's happening is everybody in the echo chamber is kind of oblivious to all of the exploitation of their fellow humans that's taking place all around them. What they're doing is they're genetically engineering people. Well, it's not really genetic engineering. It's more like a conditioning from birth. Like they're decanting people instead of allowing them to be born. So they're it's like an artificial insemination that they're doing. They're growing people in the lab, and they condition them as fetuses for the jobs that they're going to do as adults. And so, if you're an alpha, then you're doing well, because you're in the elite, and they're going to orgies and taking drugs all the time. There's but the people all around them have been conditioned. Like there's an elevator rider who's conditioned to just love being an elevator operator, and it's all about going up, up, up for him, and down, down, down for him. And when the door opens, there's lots of light and blah, blah, blah. So they're very stifled, they're treated like livestock all throughout. And it's kind of a bit of a twisted take on things. It really focuses on that tyranny of the pleasure that takes place inside the echo chamber, as well as the sexual exploitation of children, which I remember finding so bizarre when I first read Brave New World, because there's this stuff that's happening like right from the beginning of the book, where the children are expected to engage in erotic play, and they're kind of shamed and punished even if they don't want to engage in the erotic play. So I remember thinking, how bizarre is that? And this Huxley guy is some kind of a sick character. But what's really happening is that these guys lived through the previous fourth turning. So Huxley was, I talk about the fourth turning quite a bit. This happens every 4 generations. The last fourth turning would have been leading up to the Second World War, and before that, the American Civil War, and before that, the American Revolution, and before that, the witch trials of Salem, all of them on 4 generational intervals. And so Huxley would be a nomad generational archetype like the Gen Xers are currently. So he's the nomad generational archetype from the previous fourth turning, which is the midlifers during the fourth turning. And he's observing what's happening as the tyranny creeps in all around him. And it's the same for Orwell on the other side of the Atlantic. But, or wait a second, where is Huxley from? I'm not sure. But anyway, Huxley, these are observations basically that are sort of captured and communicated through literature, and there's a lot of exaggeration, metaphor, satire, that kind of thing. But there's lots of insight to be gained from this guy. I find him to be an incredibly insightful guy. So he says, the deepest sin against the human mind is to believe things without evidence. And that's the kind of tack that I've been taking since I was very young. I was a big fan of Carl Sagan when I was a teenager. I read a whole bunch of his books, and I've been living by some of his mantras since I was, probably 19, 20. Like, we prefer harsh truths to comforting lies. And I got to say, it really does kind of lead you to some interesting conclusions that most people don't really come to. And here's Huxley again as an older man. He says, defined in psychological terms, a fanatic is a man who consciously overcompensates a secret doubt. Aldous Huxley. Okay, so we see that all around us as well. There are people out there still parroting that establishment narrative, and whenever they're challenged on it, you get this kind of emotive response. I call it the blasphemy response. Okay, so they're all in the COVID cult. And, if you're blaspheming their dogma, that is the reaction that you will get. And it all kind of ties back to the survival instinct. It's part of the tribal instinct that kept us alive in the ancestral environment. That's the religious impulse that Nietzsche said we would end up putting into the state the more we secularized as a society, and effectively forecasted communism. So what you see in the useful idiot crowd is, as the narrative crumbles or as you blaspheme their dogma, they're going to be getting more and more fanatical in their emotive responses. Because it is just kind of a weird thing about human nature, but all of that ties right back to the survival instinct, the kind of tactics that our species adopted in order to survive in the ancestral environment on the plains of the savannah and in ancient Africa. But they're not exactly good strategies for modern society these days. And Freud talks about this a lot in the Civilization and its Discontents. Basically, widespread anxiety in our civilization is kind of the result of that engine of anxiety that is our psyche, constantly scheming and anticipating the next predator coming along and stuff like that. So we're basically like zoo animals living in a civilization, and a lot of our feelings, emotions, instincts, they're all attuned to much more dangerous, much more scarce circumstances. So they tend to be overreactions, right? And they'll burn us out if we let them. I wholeheartedly adore some meditative practices, stoicism, this kind of thing, to manage those anxieties that are bound to just kind of run rampant, run completely out of control. As we adopt a more sedentary lifestyle, because it's not natural for us to be sedentary. If you're sedentary in the ancestral environment, then you're going to fall prey. You're going to be somebody's meal. So that's why our minds work that way, right? Okay, and I saw this making its way around the Twitterverse. This is Chris Lambie, and he's saying this is Point Pleasant Park this morning. So, and we have a picture of a wheelchair outside of a tent, and everything is covered in snow. So that is the state of the affairs in Canada these days, folks. I'm always saying that these policies that we've been implementing over the last few years, they really affect the people at the lowest rungs of our society the most. We're seeing tent cities pop up everywhere. I know even in my sleepy little hometown of Sydney, Nova Scotia, there's a homeless shelter right in the downtown core right now, which is not much of a downtown core. It's small town Nova Scotia, but we never used to have that around here. When I left here just over 20 years ago to join the military, there were homeless people. There was Lionel and Swivel. Like, everybody knew who they were. They knew their names, and it's kind of like, that's just the deal with that guy. And we kind of looked out for them and stuff like that. But now it's like there's a population, there's a homeless population, and we see this everywhere. No surprise given the number of people they fired with the mandates. But anyway, that's where we are right now. Sad to see. So Jordan Peterson has been making headlines lately because of the backlash that he's facing from his professional association, the Ontario Ontario College of Psychologists. Yeah, and so they're witch hunting him right now for his blasphemy on Twitter. Of course, nothing he's saying about Justin Trudeau has anything to do with his ability as a psychologist, and they're coming after his professional credentials as a clinical psychologist here. So even if they strip him of those credentials, like, he's going to have no lost income. I know a lot of people out there in the freedom movement are kind of getting down about the way that he's being abused right now, but I think he's asking for it. I think this is a fight that he wants to pick. He's all set. They have no revenue stream for him to attack right now. He's all signed up with Daily Wire, and he's probably richer now than he's ever been. So bring it on, College of Psychologists. And, I think he's going to really make them look like fools in public, and that's appropriate. Excuse me. So this is Jordan Peterson case shows it's time for workplace protections on political speech. Now, the funny thing is that some provincial human rights codes, like the Nova Scotia Human Rights Code, actually already has a line written in there. They have political belief or affiliation written into the Nova Scotia Human Rights Code as prohibited grounds for discrimination. It's not in the Canadian Human Rights Act, but that could be a lesson learned from all of this. We should probably add political belief or affiliation to prohibited grounds for discrimination under the Canadian Human Rights Act as well. Not that it's stopped anybody in Nova Scotia from discriminating, really. I mean, Dr. Strang already had that Nova Scotia Court of Appeal ruling against him that said that everything they did violated human rights provincially, federally, and internationally. So back to the article here. No Canadian should ever be discriminated against in the workplace because of their political beliefs or activities. Okay, so it says, unless you have been living under a rock or shun Twitter, which is well advised, you have probably heard of Jordan Peterson's battle royale with the College of Psychologists in Ontario. We often write about the legal battles between employees and employers. Battles of professional regulators are usually less exciting, often involving mundane breaches of convoluted bureaucratic rules. The showdown between Peterson and the college is shaping up to be anything but. A core feature of the fight is freedom of speech, and that the college's misguided decision to give in to the cancel culture woke mob want to shut Peterson down and are arguing its regulatory body as their current weapon. Are using its regulatory as its current weapon. But this case exposes another big issue: political discrimination. No Canadian should ever be discriminated against in the workplace because of his or her political beliefs or political activities. But this is precisely what is happening to Peterson. Full disclosure, our firm does not represent Peterson in this case, but has acted for him in other matters, including unrelated ongoing lawsuits against Laurier University for defamation. He is ultimately being pursued for espousing conservative political views and criticizing Trudeau on social media. It is fair to query whether or not any of this would have happened if Peterson was trumpeting liberal opinions. In today's society, to ask the question is to answer it. Peterson's case is not anomalous. Allegations of political discrimination in the workplace happen more than you hear about. And you know what? I'll say that while I was in Ottawa, I tried to speak up. I was always one of the more outspoken guys. I kind of prided myself in being that 10th man, always kind of saying that thing nobody wants to say. And everybody's like, oh, well, you got to be that way. And it's like, it's important, guys. It's really important. Yeah, I mean, just sitting around the lunchroom and stuff like that in Ottawa, it's astonishing how in the tank people are for the narrative. And I don't feel comfortable engaging with them in their political discussions. Like, everything's already decided from their perspective. And I kind of throw these things in there, like, well, what about this and what about that? Because I know that they're being lied to, and you know what? They just kind of get offended when you try to engage with them on the ideas, because it's a dogma, you see. We regularly consult with clients who have been disciplined at work or even fired because they express an unpopular political opinion or participated in a political activity. We are not referring to someone espousing hate. There are clearly lines which justifiably result in termination or discipline. But forcing an employee to face consequences for saying or doing something that is not politically agreeable to the person in charge is wrong on all levels. Garnet Genius, a Conservative member of Parliament from Edmonton, is trying to do something about that. He has tabled a bill to add political belief or activity as a protected category to the Canadian Human Rights Act. Good man yourself. While the Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of the usual human rights grounds, race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, marital status, disability, and 4 other common grounds, one of them being genetic characteristics. So if you're being discriminated against on the basis of not taking that GMO jab, well, you can say, well, I'm a non-genetically modified organism and you're not allowed to discriminate against me on the basis of a genetic characteristic under the Canadian Human Rights Code. So Canadian Human Rights Act, sorry. Okay, it says it is totally silent about political belief and I got somebody trying to call me here. I'm just going to, Drew, you're going to have to call later, man. I'm in the middle of a live stream. While the Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of the usual human rights grounds, race, national or ethnic origin, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Gender identity or expression, marital status, disability on the 4 other common grounds, it is totally silent about political belief and activity. An article in the Wall Street Journal by Vivek Ramaswamy and Jed Rubenfeld in November proposed that the U.S. pursue similar legislation. Genius has explained that the bill would be inspired by the rise of, quote, stakeholder capitalism. Great. That's just communism, by the way. The term refers to the notion that companies should focus on, quote, social good instead of the bottom line. While that sounds fine in principle, the result is that you end up with companies preaching moral messages and jumping on virtue signaling bandwagons while not sincerely practicing what they preach. For example, how many companies out there extol the virtues of mental wellness while treating their own employees poorly? Stakeholder capitalism quickly spills over into policing what employees do and say in their downtime. And this is another thing that really had me feeling like the sword of Damocles was always hanging over my head while I was in the military. As you can see, I'm pretty into politics. I'm a bit of an information junkie. It's just, most guys follow sports. I follow politics. It's just kind of my bag. And I know as a military member, I'm not allowed to comment on basically Canadian politics or military matters. So I would stick to American politics. Most of the time it was like my pro wrestling. And I was watching as the CBC was hunting down dissidents, basically right wingers, young guys who lean right on social media again and again and again, just trying to drag people through the mud based on what they're posting on social media. And anyway, it has a real chilling effect. I remember having the Ferryman's Toll on here, Alex, there a while back. So he was saying how he actually left the military. He was a reservist in Ottawa. I think he was with not the foot guards there, but the frat boy bunch in Ottawa. Anyway, they with all the things that he was just seeing coming out about right-wing extremism and police in the ranks and stuff like this, like it's an ideological purge, and recognizing it for what it was. Like, he gave them his walking papers, and he was apparently very forthcoming with them about the reasons for it. He's reading their reports and he's saying, you guys are talking about me, like you guys hate me. And the thing is, the guys at the lowest level, they're always kind of like, well, no, we're all in it together. Like we don't really think this is just sort of, what the establishment is putting out there right now. And we kind of have to parrot this stuff. That's their attitude. Right. But and that's also why Orwell said that if an uprising was ever going to come, it would have to come from the proles, because the people who are kind of living and working together were all kind of like, no, we don't have a problem with each other, and it's the people at the top that they're pushing this polarizing dogma all the time. Back to the article. If a company is invested in preaching messages based on popular social ideologies of the day, there will be little tolerance for an employee who is out there saying or doing something that is, quote, off message. And this becomes an invitation for political opponents or even personal enemies or upset former spouses to send letters to employers denouncing offside employees, hoping to derail their career tracks, or even get them fired. As the woke crowd has become more powerful, we have seen this increasingly in our practice. The current climate of, quote, cancel culture, close quote, is evocative of U.S. McCarthyism, but it is more pervasive and destructive. As Lance Morrow points out in the Wall Street Journal, quote, wokeness will prove harder to kill than McCarthyism. McCarthy was a B-movie monster. Wokeness is a zombie apocalypse. Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy right there. And I'm glad they're drawing the parallels with McCarthyism in this because, yeah, it's a witch hunt. And is it... It's not genius, but it's like Guinness, I guess, has argued that Canadians should be equal before the law, regardless of political belief. And that is true. Although his proposed amendment to the Canadian Human Rights Act would only apply to federally regulated employers, while most employees are provincially regulated, it would be an important start. If the bill passes, some provinces would likely follow suit. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, if they're regulated federally, or if they're regulated, like you're in Canada, you can't violate the Canadian Human Rights Act. You're in Canada, you're not allowed to discriminate on these grounds, and that goes for even just businesses that are open to the public. You can't, you can't tell people that they're not welcome to eat here because they're Jewish, can you? No, of course not. The same, I've made the argument that the same goes for the face burqa, because that's all it is. It's an expression of faith, of fealty to the regime. And you can't discriminate on the basis of creed or religious belief in Canada. So that's effectively what they're doing. Like it's a creed. That's not an evidence-based conclusion that they've come to put on the face burqa to conserve human life. No, it's just to say, it's just to identify the team that you're on, of course. Okay, so the Ontario Human Rights Code does not include a protection ground for political belief or conviction. The Nova Scotia Human Rights Code does. Peterson's case just may very well change this. If the law doesn't change to add protection for the political discrimination, what is to stop an employer from asking in a job interview who they voted for or what newspapers they read? Dangerously, that seems to be where we are headed. Yeah, so this is... I talk a lot about how this stuff is kind of arising organically. The authoritarianism, as we can see, is kind of an organic process. It starts in the culture first. And what's in the culture one day is in the politics the next, because politics is downstream from culture. And as Jordan Peterson points out, what's in the university one day is in the culture the next. And I think that our enemies, like the Chinese, who have studied us, recognize very well that just a little drop of ideological poison at the top of the intellectual pyramid there in academia is really all it takes to really have some serious, like deadly ramifications further down on the lower rungs of society. By the time all that hatred and aggression towards the other trickles down to the lowest levels, you end up with vehicle attacks against peaceful, freedom-loving protesters in Winnipeg, like we saw with the globalist news ISIS vehicle attack. So, moving on. Polyev mum on Tory MP's illegal refugees comment calls for Roxham Road. I'm just kind of throwing this in the middle because it seems to be that Polyev, they're really coming after him, the establishment here. So. The illegal refugees, I know what this is going to be about. It's the same tactic they've been using for years and years and years and years and years, where they start saying like no person is illegal. And when you're saying an illegal refugee, like a refugee does it does refer to a person, but it's a certain category, a legal category of person. So I'm happy to just say lawbreakers when it comes to illegal migrants, illegal refugees, because they always take that legal category of person and they turn it into a protected class of some kind. But it doesn't have anything to do with who they are or where they're coming from. It has to do with whether or not they follow the process. And so I think probably a good tactic at this point would just be to call them lawbreakers. Okay, so here's the article. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre calls for the closure of Roxham Road irregular border crossing on, they won't even say illegal, they say irregular, border crossing on Tuesday, but sidestepped questions about one of his MPs denying help to a family who used it to enter the country. During the news conference on Parliament Hill, his first of 2023, he told reporters that he favors legal immigration, but can understand the desperation that leads migrants to cross into Canada through the unofficial entry point south of Montreal. And the issue is, like, south of Montreal is the Roxham Road, like it's the U.S. Okay, and we already have agreements with the U.S. That basically, like, they can't claim refugee status here because the people that are coming came from the third world or entered illegally into the United States, and they've been coming here for fear that Donald Trump will enforce immigration law in the United States. Now, if they're already in the United States and they're fleeing oppression somewhere else, well, they're safe once they're in the United States. So they're not genuinely seeking refuge when they come to Canada. That's not what the system is for. We already have agreements in place. I can't remember what it is. It's like the Safe Migration Compact or something that we have with the United States. That says no, we're not going to grant status to people who are abusing the system in this way. I mean, this is the kind of thing that leaves the system open to abuse. People are pointing to the abuse and they're being accused of bigotry because hate is the new heresy. During the news conference on Parliament Hill, I did that one. Quote, I understand why desperate people are trying to cross there, he said. Our system is now so slow and so broken. Yeah, I don't know. I think that there's probably a pretty significant portion of that population that they could be involved in all kinds of illegal activity, be it human trafficking or whatever. So there are all kinds of victims of this kind of a hole in the system like that. So there's a real human cost, and I think they're really sweeping under the rug here. Poilievre pointed to the fact that the Federal Immigration Department currently has a backlog of nearly 1.1 million applications in process, which was higher under periods of lockdown during the first 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic. Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada reported that as of the end of November, it had 1.09 million applicants in the queue that exceeded the department's service standard, a problem that the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government has committed to tackle. The Tory leader argued Tuesday that fixing the problem could lead to fewer people crossing through unofficial entry points such as Roxham Road. Quote, it's not legal to cross there. That's the reality. It is not legal to cross there, close quote. Thousands of asylum seekers have entered the country between official ports of entry in recent years, then made refugee claims once in Canada. Those who come from the United States via official crossings can be turned away under Canada's Safe Third Country Agreement. There you go. Safe Third Country Agreement with the U.S. on the basis that claimants have access to fair asylum process south of the border. And that's why we have Canada's Safe Third Country Agreement with the U.S. is to prevent abuse of the system, because then you end up with all kinds of criminal elements and who knows what. Those who come from the United States via the official crossings can be turned away under Canada's Safe Third Country Agreement with the U.S. on the basis the claimants have access to fair asylum south of the border. Radio Canada reported last month that Quebec Conservative MP Richard Martel recently refused to help a family martyr that was facing deportation after having entered Canada through Roxham Road in 2018, calling them illegal refugees. I would just call them lawbreakers. As soon as you put refugees in there, then that's a person. That's like a class of, and that's what they do is they turn it around and turn it into like refugee almost means minority, right? They that's what they try to turn it into. So yes, I would say stay away from those terms and just call them lawbreakers. Poilievre did not directly answer when asked about Martel's comments Tuesday, but said the Liberal government should renegotiate the Canada-US agreement, quote, in order to close Roxham Road, close quote. He said Trudeau must fix the system so that people enter into official entry points instead, quote, renegotiate the deal with the Americans and speed up the process of immigration generally, close quote. In December, in a French interview with the Canadian press, José Nicolas Lopez said that Jose Nicola Lopez said that his sister-in-law, Leticia Cruz, said her son had crossed into Canada via Roxham Road to join their relatives in 2018. He said he did so because she feared expulsion under the former President Donald Trump's policies and was afraid that the possible return to her home country of El Salvador could make her a target for street gangs. And that could be a very valid claim for refugee status in the United States. But if you went to the United States first and you're expected to claim refugee status there, not Canada. It's wherever the first safe country of entry is. And again, it's to prevent abuse. And there's no reason to be afraid of Donald Trump. If you apply for refugee status, then they'll consider that. But this is somebody they're talking about here who hasn't actually applied. So Lopez said at the time that he found Martel's comments to be offensive and ignorant. After Cruz was unable to help from Martel, whose Chicoutimi area riding she and her son call home, Bloc Québécois MP Mario Simard said he worked with Immigration Minister Sean Fraser to help the family avoid deportation. Fraser, the Bloc, and the NDP criticized Martel's comments as lacking compassion. In a recent interview with Radio Canada, Martel declined to offer specifics about the case. Okay, the lacking compassion comment is about that particular individual. There's a compassion to be considered for, the people in the communities that are having to deal with waves of, of vulnerable people coming in who need resources and a lot of help. And if you just look at what's happening down at the U.S. border there, like there's a real human cost to the people in these border towns. A lot of people in Quebec have been getting very upset with the cost to the taxpayer for all this compassion for one person, but not the people here, the people who live in these towns. And the victims of a lot of crime. I mean, we've seen murders. Justin Trudeau was the guy who said that if any of these Syrian refugees murder Canadian children, then their blood will be on my hands. And that has happened. There was a case like that in Vancouver, and there was the cabbie who raped his female fare in Halifax, and so there are all kinds of issues that really we need to be. They're coming from war-torn countries. They're coming from very violent places where violence is just kind of the norm, and there's a desensitization to human suffering that takes place in the human psyche. I think over the course of many years in a place like that. And we need to be very careful about who we're letting in here. Are we letting in the oppressed people who need protection, or are we letting in the oppressors? And that's what we have immigration law in place to sort out. And if you just disregard it altogether, then you're letting in victimizers and oppressors into our communities, and they're going to harm the people that are already there. So. Okay. In a recent interview with Radio Canada, Martel declined to offer specifics about the case. Speaking in French, he said the case was complex and that he declined to help, knowing that the Bloc were in a position to do so. He said he would likely make the same decision if a similar file came across his desk, adding it's a matter of value. So it's a matter of rule of law, I think. That's the value that he's going there for. Okay, and here's the Independent from across the pond. They are reporting on what's going on in Nova Scotia here. So in Nova Scotia, we had a woman went to the emergency room, I believe it was with stomach pain, and she never even so much as got an anesthetic before she died there on the emergency room floor. Oh no, they're all too busy. They're too busy. Anyway, we have to rely on foreign media to tell us just how much our government is harming us these days, but here's the Independent. So.
Died waiting for medical care at an emergency room. Gunter Holthoff of Tidnish said his wife Allison began feeling severe stomach pain on the morning of December 31st. They drove to the nearest emergency department in Amherst around 11 a.m. Holthoff said it was after 6 p.m. before they saw a doctor and Allison received any treatment.
And I told them, like, she's getting worse, like, she's in pain. And she said, oh, yeah, we'll do what we can. It was all so much information, I don't even 100% know what I said or what she said, but something along the lines, like, I told her she was getting worse. I did, from there on, I did tell the triage nurse and the lady behind the desk, at least a couple of times, that it was getting worse. She wasn't doing good. She was in pain, and there was not much of a response. We're doing what we can. We don't have any beds. She really did look good. Really did look good. I see my grandfather when I was little in a vacant coma, and honestly, he looked better at the time than she did now.
The CBC's Sarah Galashan is following the story. So, Sarah, what more do we know about the circumstances?
There's some heartbreaking detail coming from that press conference given by Gunter Holthoff, Andrew, about his wife Allison's condition the morning of December 31st. She had experienced stomach pain earlier in September, and since then there had been a certain amount of pain that she'd been dealing with. But December 31st, things were different. And so he says they got to the hospital in record time. You heard him say there was around 11 a.m. His account of this timeline, he says that he thinks that they were out of triage quite quickly by about 11:15 a.m. He talks about the kind of signals she was giving about the pain that she was in. He had to carry her into the Cumberland Regional Health Center. Then she was put in a wheelchair. And after triage at around 11:15, there they sat, he says, in the waiting room. She was most of the time slumped over in a wheelchair. At one point, lying down on the floor in a fetal position to try and deal with the pain. And they were there throughout the day until around 3 p.m., he says, when they were finally moved into a room that he recalls had little to no medical equipment in it. And there they stayed in that room as she was an insignificant amount of pain. A doctor asking at one point whether or not she was had smoked marijuana, and she said that she had, or her husband spoke for her, saying that she had, that she used a vape pen at times, and the doctor suggesting that can cause pain. At one point, she turned to her husband, Gunter, and said, "This is not from smoking marijuana." At one point, around 6 p.m. Or just before, she was screaming in pain, and that.
So I think the assertion that it has something to do with smoking weed or vaping, I find that to be absurd on its face. And this is an example of scapegoating. So this is kind of the modus operandi that I've been talking about of the boomer generation in the military. At least they scapegoated Kyle Brown for Somalia. He was the Gen Xer who blew the lid off the whole thing. And that's what they do in authoritarian regimes. Okay. I mean, if things are not going well, it's never the fault of the people in charge. It's always the fault of the rank and file.
Prompting a doctor to prescribe an IV for that pain. Things happening quickly after that. He says about 6:30 p.m. she was moved into an X-ray room, and he recalls it was about 15 minutes after that he heard the call of code blue. He says that there were attempts to she was resuscitated at 3 different occasions, but that she lost too much blood. And by 9 p.m., they had to have a tough conversation about the amount of blood that she had lost and her chances of surviving a surgery and what the outcome actually would look like if she did even survive that surgery, of which there was little chance that she would. And Andrew, that's when he had to make the difficult call to let Allison go.
Is he getting any answers, and what are authorities saying?
Well, he is not. He says he's not getting answers from the autopsy, not a complete picture as to what exactly caused her death, and that's what he wants to know. In addition, whether or not delay in treatment or a misdiagnosis during triage may have contributed to this. The health authority not commenting due to privacy concerns. The Premier of Nova Scotia was asked to weigh in on this, and I want to play you his response.
Total sadness, I think, is what we all feel over that. So, we'll try to understand what happened there. There will be an investigation. There's a lot of questions, and I think we'll go through the investigation, try to understand, some of these questions, get some answers, and certainly have those discussions with the family would be my expectation, hope. Yeah.
We also heard from the health minister who.
I just want to point out too that Tim Houston is the Conservative Party leader, and the provincial government did change hands during the pandemic in Nova Scotia, but it was out with the old boss, in with the new, and really, it's like I keep saying, the politicians are really just kind of the stage actors. The people running our institutions, the ones at peak institutional power right now, the boomer generation, they are the puppet masters behind the scenes. So the provincial change in leadership was not felt really in Nova Scotia, especially not in terms of the harshness of lockdowns and the big mess that was made coming into the pandemic by the outgoing Liberal government, and they just kind of kept on the same path. The same policies. It's kind of inconsequential. It really is that generational change in leadership at the institutional level that matters. And that's what happened at the end of the Second World War, was when the leadership of the institutions changed hands between the missionary generation, which was a prophet generational archetype like the boomers, to the lost generation, which was a nomad generational archetype like the Gen Xers.
Is talking about the sort of added level of complication to what the staff at this Cumberland Regional Health Center are dealing with. Not only are they dealing with what we see across the country in terms of the short staffing and stressed out workers within hospitals, but there was a flood back in May of 2022, which caused them to have to relocate from the emergency room. And what we heard from Gunther's MLA is that those renovations to the emergency room were supposed to take 8 weeks, and there have been significant delays, and they're still not completed. So that's just an added layer, Andrew, to what is going on here.
All right, Sarah, thank you.
Yeah.
And they will try to put all that stuff, like all the failures, are going to be, put on the shoulders of the rank and file. Like I said, and come on, full screen, what's going on? And we saw this too with things like when they reopened air travel. All of a sudden there are all these jams in the airports, and what are they saying? Oh, Canadians forgot how to travel. So it doesn't matter. Like it's analogous to what happens in the military, where there are all the sexual assault scandals of the 80s and 90s, especially the 90s. And the leadership, the generation that really was responsible for all of that, they're the ones that are in charge right now. And what are they saying all the time? Well, it's the younger generations coming in now that are the problem. It's the younger generations coming in now. And they say this at the town halls. I've attended them. And the fact of the matter is there's just no data to support that assertion. The rate of criminal sexual assault in Canada has actually been cut in half since about the early 90s, since the boomer generation aged out of the 15 to 39 age category, where essentially 80% of the criminal victimization takes place. Again, we're dealing with problems that are endemic to the human condition, and that just happens to be where humans are most aggressive, is right during that time. Well, earlier than that, obviously. We don't even send people under 18 to prison. They're just so so aggressive, and they haven't had as much time, to kind of master this animal that we're all walking around in here. But yeah, 15 to 39, that's where all the 80% of the criminal victimization takes place. The peak for criminal victimization really took place while the boomers were in that age category, and they blame the younger generations. So here's a little something from the province of Nova Scotia's own website. Update on vaccination mandate for healthcare, education, and other sectors. This is from November 5th, 2021. So this is old. I just wanted to remind everybody what they were doing here at the time. They imposed these vaccine mandates on nurses and fired everybody who didn't take them. So here it is. The province is releasing initial data on vaccination rates of workers in healthcare, long-term care, education, and emergency healthcare services today, November 5th. Employers are required to collect and report vaccination rates as part of the COVID-19 vaccine mandate announced September 29th. Under the mandate, all employees are required to have at least a first dose of vaccine by November 30th, with a requirement to show proof of full vaccination 70 days after their first dose. Those who are partially vaccinated may be subjected to other health and safety measures, including testing. Those who do not have a first dose by November 30th will be placed on unpaid administrative leave. Okay, so there you go. That's where it all started. So they don't have anybody working in their hospitals now. Everybody's vastly overburdened, and you can see they're putting up their 99% vaccination rate for emergency health services, but how much of that is because they fired the unvaccinated? So it really is all about optics right now. I found that throughout my career too, is that the institutions are image obsessed. They talk about it like we're maintaining the public trust and confidence, but it's always about manipulating the public trust and confidence as opposed to earning it. So yeah, I mean, this is a self-imposed crisis. This death didn't have to happen. It's entirely because of the heavy-handed approach the province took with political dissidents with respect to the genetic modification. So we have to live with the fallout of this, and of course the decision makers who created these conditions, they're going to continue to scapegoat the rest of us. And as I pointed out in the program, I think yesterday, what Nova Scotia is doing now is they're really ramping up these programs to bring nurses from places like Rwanda. And we have had this immigration program for decades now, where we're looking for qualified immigrants. We're looking for educated people. We've had a real brain drain that started, back in the 90s and 80s, when a lot of our professionals were seeking the higher salaries of the United States. So we lost a lot of our brain power to the United States because of that. And we started recruiting from other countries. So we brain drained them. We brain drained Rwanda. They're in a war zone. They have, refugee camps and stuff like this all over the place. Like, they need nurses, and we're poaching their nurses to come and work here. And we have not accredited them. Like, the whole time we've been doing this since the 90s, we haven't been accrediting them for their foreign education. Like, our own institutions, the health authorities and whatnot, they won't let them practice. It's in engineers too. I ran into all kinds of people during my time in Ottawa. I actually drove Uber for a couple of years to kind of make ends meet there, and I got to meet all kinds of people. And I remember driving this dentist around one time, and I can't remember what country he was from, but they won't let him practice based on his dental qualifications from his country of origin anywhere but in the Northern Territories. So they're so desperate for dentists up there, especially in a lot of the isolated Indigenous communities, that they'll allow him to practice up north, but not in the rest of Canada. And I'm like, man, we got to do better than this. We got to get governing bodies to fast track these things somehow. And if there needs to be some kind of a program put in place to really to hone professionals from other countries onto the differences between their practices and our practices in order to make them more effective in our system, then I'm all for it. But that's not what they're doing. Now they're just going to do away with all of those protections that they've been enforcing for the last few decades. It's like the professional institutions are enforcing their professional standards, but the immigration system, they just keep bringing people in that are never going to be accredited. And now, instead of finally getting some kind of a joint venture between the regulatory bodies and the immigration system towards properly qualifying these people to work in our systems, what they're doing is they're just bringing in, they're just doing away with those protections that they've been enforcing for so long. So here we have August 24th, 2022. Again, this is a little bit older, but NSCN, so that helps, NSCN helps internationally educated nurse applicants by streamlining registration and licensing processes and collaborating with health partners. So NSCN is the Nova Scotia College of Nursing. I just had to scroll up there for you guys. And here it is right here. It says Halifax, Nova Scotia. As Nova Scotia's nursing regulator, the Nova Scotia College of Nurses role is to ensure that all nurses providing nursing services for Nova Scotians are qualified to do so. The public depends on NSCN to ensure that licenses are only granted to those who demonstrate they have the knowledge, skill, and competence required to safely and ethically practice as a nurse. NSCN does this by establishing registration requirements all applicants must meet. NSCN continues to comprehensively review all registration and licenses process to ensure they are relevant, flexible, and positively contribute to the supply of nurses while simultaneously meeting NSCN's legislative mandate to protect the public. Quote, we have been working hard to streamline our registration and licensing processes for internationally educated nurses and have made changes in 5 key areas, close quote, says Sue Smith, CEO and registrar at NSCN. Quote, these changes will favorably impact the number of qualified nurses to enter the healthcare system, which will positively impact the care of all Nova Scotians, close quote. These changes include adding more options to meet the English language proficiency registration requirement, such as an employer's assessment of language proficiency or completion of nursing and non-nursing education in Canada. Yeah, you may or may not be able to communicate with your nurse in the future if they're, starting to fool around with the English language proficiency requirement. Very important in Nova Scotia, obviously. Providing earlier access to the national registration exam, such as enabling IENs, that's internationally educated nurses, such as enabling IENs meeting certain specific criteria and opportunity to write the national registration RN or LPN exam instead of completing a competence assessment or bridging/re-entry nursing education. So bridging assessments, that stuff all sounds good. The way it stands right now is, as I understand it from the people that I've spoken with, seems to be the case that they come in with their degrees from other countries, and our expectation is that they're going to do the degree all over again. And of course, very few people actually follow through on that. They usually go to work in other areas because they're just, they're at different stages of their lives at this point. In young people, like it takes a lot of drive, to really establish yourself in a profession. I often hear that graduate's degrees and beyond, like the bachelor's, is kind of the one that's really hard to get. Yeah, I mean, once you kind of get older and you're established in your own country, and then you come here and they say, well, you got to start all over again. A lot of people are just not that motivated to do that. Okay, back to the article here. Authorizing earlier entry to practice with specific parameters while the IEN is working towards fulfilling their outstanding registration requirements. Examples of parameters include requiring the IEN to submit additional documentation or complete additional education within a time frame. Enabling internationally and domestically educated nurses meeting some but not all of the required number of practice hours to return to practice with specific conditions and restrictions on their license. The conditions may require the nurse to develop a return to practice plan with their employer that includes at least 120 hours of one-to-one mentorship, develop a learning plan, meeting with an NSCN practice consultant, and provide NSCN with progress updates. So the one-to-one mentorship, I'm often wondering, like, what are the people that are still there thinking right now about, bringing in these replacements for the people that they've worked with their entire lives who took a stand on principle and stood for human rights in Canada. I wonder, I just wonder, like, what's going on with people in the institutions right now, and it's concerning when I start to think about, say, the RCMP and how they've covered up the largest mass shooting in Canadian history and how that was in Portapique, Nova Scotia. So that really shows a kind of low regard for our lives here in Nova Scotia. And they just keep getting those huge salary bumps. And that is exactly the kind of incentive I think you need to keep thugs around. So it's very concerning, the trend that we're seeing right now. Okay, so and the last bullet here is policy and progress changes include reducing the documentation required for IEN. So reducing documentation required of internationally educated nurses. So all of this really kind of sounds like some highfalutin gibberish for rolling back professional standards. because we fired all the professionals, and they're bringing in scabs at this point. We are being replaced. They said they wanted to replace old stock Canadians, and that seems to be exactly what they're doing. Okay, so here is Ryan Gerritsen, and he says, our government is run by complete shysters. It is scary how Canadians are putting up with these criminals. Where did they get trained to talk like this? Trudeau, Freeland, Joly, they're all programmed to bullshit. Jail time is needed. So where they learn to talk like this, it's the boomer hegemony, the boomer political establishment that's coaching them. It's the same kind of political establishment on both sides of the aisle, whether you're talking about liberal or conservative. They all serve the same donor base, the same donor class, political class, investment class, and institutional leaders within the public service. As Trudeau always says, he just takes orders from the public service, like the Privy Council office and Jody Thomas. So yeah, okay. And this is Chrystia Freeland. She was trending on Twitter this morning, so I thought it was worth an honorable mention, and none of it's good. People are, as you can see, it's right over here in the what's happening box. We got 17.7K tweets here trending in Canada for Freeland. And here she is getting grilled by Elizabeth Marshall, who's a senator. And this is a bit of one of those rare moments that we're seeing in Canadian history where the Senate is anything but inert. And they were going to vote against the Emergency Measures Act. So these are very unprecedented times in Canada. Usually the Senate is completely passive. So anyway, this is good, I think, for us, not for Freeland. Here we go.
Division 1 on the Canada Growth Fund. And I have some concerns about that section of the bill. It's going to provide $2 billion to you as minister to buy shares in a corporation which does not exist. There's no legislation which tells us anything about this yet to be created corporation. We don't know anything about the composition of the board or even whether there will be a board. There's nothing to tell us about the financial controls that will be exercised over the $2 billion. And there's nothing to indicate what the governance structure is going to be. And equally concerning, there's a section there in that part of the bill that says that the $2 billion isn't the most that's going to be paid out. It leaves it quite open that there could be future monies coming out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund, and there's no limit on it. So what I don't understand is why, if you're going to establish a fund with money of that magnitude, why isn't there a separate bill which would outline the specifics of the company and also what the company is going to do, what the mandate is, what the objectives are, what the board composition is going to be? So it's really concerning to see $2 billion going out with an explanation. I think there were 17 lines there, and it leaves it quite open that additional monies can be paid out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So why is there not a separate piece of legislation?
You know what? I'm not sure where the senator is from, but she's got that accent there. If I'm not mistaken, that's Newfoundland, right? It's a little bit hard to tell with the audio. So that's, I think, an important divide to highlight in the ideological battle space is that of the urban-rural divide. And as I started off the program talking about Aldous Huxley and how he focuses on the echo chamber, remember that the echo chamber, the elitist echo chamber, like there are kind of layers to it, right? So there's the boomer component of it. The boomer, it's obviously, it's not all the boomers, but it's like the boomers, the cosmopolitan boomers, the elites. So the cosmopolitans being like the city slickers. Once you kind of add that layer over it, you really get a much more precise lens in terms of target acquisition in the ideological battle space. And as you can see, like you've got rodeo scholar Chrystia Freeland here, just sort of epitomizing the problem that we face, the leadership crisis that we're in right now. But here she goes.
Well, thank you for the question. And
again, like this is the divide. This is the rural urban divide. And out in the sticks, they tend to be a little lower BS. You know, there are harsh realities that people come into contact with, even in small town rural areas, that a lot of people in the cities just don't have to deal with. And it's not hard to see how we fall on opposite sides of the gun debate when it comes to that. But anyway, here we have the cosmopolitan Wicked Witch of the WEF coming in here. So I feel like I should give a Trudeau warning, but this is Freeland.
Thank you for focusing on what I actually believe is one of the most important elements of this. Was introduced in the budget and elaborated on in the fall economic statement, and something that I see as one of the most important elements of our green transition. The Canada Growth Fund will actually be capitalized at $15 billion, and the objective is for that government money to pull in private capital at a ratio of at least 3 to 1. It will be managed by professionals. We understand that we need to have actual investment professionals do this work. It's going to do perform some very sophisticated jobs in the green transition.
I often wonder, like, I don't think they'll ever admit it to themselves, but do they think that, like, the state grants wishes? Do they think that, that this is all magic? Because that's how they talk. That's how they behave. They're like, well, we are in charge of the state. That means it grants our wishes. And when things go sideways, they just blame, everybody doing the work. And it's like, well, how do you guys know that any of these, aspirations of yours are even achievable? But they don't. She has no idea what's going on in finance, for crying out loud. She's just a George Soros fangirl. She was going to be his official biographer before she took the job as a cabinet minister.
Position, including contracts for difference, which we are hearing from investors in Canada and outside Canada, is a really important element to ensure that people have the confidence in our carbon pricing system to invest in it. And I'll just add one more thing. I do want to hear your next question, Senator. But to the question of why are we doing it now, I would say to you two things. One, the green transition, we have to act quickly. But from my perspective, the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act added to the urgency with which Canada needs to act. They are deploying hundreds of billions of dollars to invest in the green transition. We need to move really, really fast. And so getting this fund in place quickly is more important than ever.
But Minister, you can't put the fund in place. You're saying, give me the $2 billion, I'll buy some shares, but the company doesn't even exist. The company doesn't exist, and you're giving us all this information verbally. If that's the mandate of this soon to be, or this corporation you're talking about, why isn't it in the legislation? I mean, we're looking at this. There's 17 lines there to justify spending at least $2 billion, and then it leaves it wide open for there to be additional appropriations coming out of the Canada Revenue Fund. Like, I'm just very, very surprised to see it. $2 billion with no explanation within the bill over how the $2 billion is going to be controlled. The company's not even created, and what are you going to buy shares in? There's no company yet.
Yeah, so she's asking for carte blanche is what she's doing. Chrystia Freeland, this is and this is something I saw a lot in my Surface too. It's the practice of rubber stamping. Every bit of training I think I ever did outside of maybe basic training was a rubber stamp course in the military. That includes, my technical training that I did through them, as well as my leadership training that I did through them. It was pretty sad, actually. So she just kind of drafts this up, says, okay, check in the box. We have something that looks like legislation here. So that means we get the money, and people aren't going along with it. You know, they're like, wait a second, no, this is other people's money, and rubber stamps aren't going to cut it.
Senator, you are one of the most precise and
here's Mark of the con man right here, con woman, whatever. Pardon my fellow centrism ladies. But yeah, she starts flattering her right away. Okay. Buttering her up. And I almost spit out my coffee. I forgot that she went into this when I watched it earlier, but I forgot that she went into this little spiel. It's cringeworthy. Like, she's not even good at this. I think anybody that she tries to run this con on is going to see exactly what it is. And it's just so condescending, you know, it's so insulting to this senator's intelligence that she would even attempt that. So,
and best, you know, you're one of the most precise questioners I face, and have a very, very strong financial.
She's not even articulate.
Background. And I really appreciate that. And I think that scrutiny is important. What I would say in terms of the Canada Growth Fund is what I hear from Canadians and from Canadian businesses, especially in wake of the Inflation Reduction Act, is Canada has to move fast, and Canada has to move faster than we have hitherto. So we are moving quickly to structure the Canada Growth Fund. We're going to be fully transparent in how we stand it up, and details are going to be forthcoming in the coming weeks and months. But I really believe, given the hundreds of billions of dollars that the U.S. is deploying, we cannot allow the U.S. to suck all of that investment south of the border.
So we need to move faster than we have hitherto. So we need to go faster than we have been up until this point. Why? Because the U.S., the people in the US actually did their jobs and did this already. And so now that's going to create a problem for us in terms of market demand. So here's our rubber stamp, because we didn't do our jobs up until now, and give us the money so we don't get, steamrolled by the United States here. So there's Chrystia Freeland, our super minister of deputy prime minister and finance minister here, with absolutely no experience doing anything but swooning over George Soros. Okay, and here she is, Wicked Witch of the WEF, Chrystia Freeland, to attend WEF annual meeting in Davos. I don't know, I kind of feel like I want to start calling it the WEF, because it's a little more mocking, you know. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland will be attending the World Economic Forum's annual meeting. The global organization is hosting its 2023 annual meeting in the Swiss mountain town of Davos next week. The conference theme is, quote, cooperation in a fragmented world, close quote, which the WEF is necessary given the, quote, a sheer number of ongoing crises, close quote, facing the world right now. Freeland has attended Davos several times and sits on the WEF's board of trustees. It's not clear if Freeland will be speaking. She did not attend the WEF's 2022 meeting, but spoke on a panel about implementing, quote, stakeholder capitalism, close quote, at the 2021 event, which was held virtually. Like, why aren't all of these things held virtually? We've been doing the parliament, we've been doing court appearances, all kinds of stuff virtually, domestically here in Canada. And the folks, well, I mean, it's a scam, right? That's the answer to the question. Why aren't we doing this virtually? You know, they could very easily do that instead of taking entire teams of people over there and burning all that fuel, obviously. But the reason they're not doing it is because these are the people who are in the club. And we all pay into their club so they can enjoy living that high life, while the proles like us are just going to have to make do with less. So the WEF positions itself as a platform for convening private and public sector leaders to tackle global challenges. Other attendees of the 2023 meeting include former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and U.S. Climate Envoy John Kerry. Oh my God, he's I don't know. He's such a clown. John Kerry, he's just such a wooden guy. And the biggest boondoggle, I think, in U.S. foreign policy for the last few decades has been in the Israeli-Palestine conflict there. And John Kerry has been absolutely out to lunch on that the entire time, and especially on the point of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, which Trump did, I think, second year in office, something like that, second or third year in office. So that's just another one of these guys that's been humiliated by the Trump presidency. Okay. At a pre-meeting press conference Tuesday morning, WEF vendor Klaus Schwab said this year's meeting will have, quote, unprecedented, close quote, participation, including from dozens of finance ministers and foreign ministers from countries around the world. True North will be on the ground in Davos starting this weekend to report on the proceedings. Okay, so good for True North. I'm glad to see that somebody's following these people around, because you can't count on the state media to do that because they're just propaganda. And just for a little boost, I know listening to Chrystia Freeland can really get us down out there, but I thought that this guy did a pretty good job of showing us that we do have some good people out there still scrapping for us. So here we go.
Mr. Freeland, were you aware, yes or no? It's a simple question.
I don't have the article before me, and I'm not here to answer questions about the CBC.
The Deputy Prime Minister, the most senior cabinet minister, is not prepared to accept whether or not the CBC retracted a false story?
I don't speak for the CBC, sir.
You, as the most senior cabinet minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, relied upon that initial story from the CBC and shared your concerns with Canadians regarding terrorism funding and money laundering. Your words, correct?
Let me be very clear. My principal concern when it comes to the illegal occupation and the illegal blockades is the economic harm that
Let me be very clear, Minister Freeland. Your words several times in the House referred to terrorism funding and money laundering. Are you saying you didn't use those words?
I am speaking here today, and I am talking about the central motivation of our very serious
And
actions.
I'm here to ask you questions, and I expect, unlike question period, I expect a response. So my response is, do you recall using the words terrorism funding and money laundering in the House and reporting outside the House? Yes or no?
All right, well done, Brock. I like that guy. No BS, lots of straight talk. That's what we're looking for, guys, is that radical candor, right? And I think he's got it. He's a real straight shooter from my read anyway. Okay, so here's the CBC reporting Canada to purchase U.S. missile defense system for Ukraine. So this is an escalation, and that's what we expect to see in a fourth turning. That's why we had a second world war after the first, is because this generational archetype, when they're wielding power like this, they don't engage in diplomacy. They just double down against their enemies and drive the rest of us into the meat grinder of history. So the PMO announces President Biden will visit Canada in March. The Prime Minister's office has announced that Canada will buy a U.S.-made missile defense system for Ukraine and will welcome U.S. President Joe Biden for a visit in March. The news came during the North American Leaders Summit in Mexico City on Tuesday, following a meeting between Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Biden. And a PMO readout of the meeting said Trudeau informed Biden that Canada will purchase the National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System, or NASAMS, for Ukraine. The Department of National Defense, DND, confirmed the purchase in a news release later Tuesday. Quote, Canada's NASAMS donation will help Ukraine strengthen its air defense systems against destructive air attacks on military sites, civilian critical infrastructure, and population centers. Close quote, DND said in the news release. So our Department of National Defense is buying weapons for Ukraine. And I've asked this question before, but I got to wonder at what point Vladimir Putin just kind of says, okay, we're clearly at war, guys. Like, we have a border with Russia. There's the potential that he could open up another front, and all of our howitzer 777s have gone over there, and we're deploying 1,000 troops there very soon to Latvia, I believe. So I don't want to see the millennials become nuclear shadows in Europe. That's for sure. And all I really know about the war for sure is that they're lying, and they have the same kind of telltale signs of kabuki theater going on over there in Ukraine. Clearly, the president there is an actor, Zelensky, and it's a lot of theater. So as long as that is the case, I see no justification for Canada doing anything, because we don't know what's really happening there. So the release said the donation would cost approximately 406 million and would come from 500 million in aid to Ukraine, the Trudeau announced in November of 2022. The release did not say when the system is expected to arrive in Ukraine. That would be OPSEC, I believe, as in operational security. Of intelligence value to the Russians. In an interview airing Tuesday on CBC's Power and Politics, Defense Minister Anita Anand told the guest host Catherine Cullen the government is, quote, working with the United States to get it to Ukraine as soon as possible, close quote. Quote, all options will always be on the table in terms of our support to Ukraine, close quote, Anand said. So all options, including what? Ground assault, I guess. And who's going to do that? And can we even defend the Arctic right now? The missile defense system was designed and developed jointly by the American defense company Raytheon and Norway-based Kongsberg Defense and Aerospace. Quote, NASAMS provides air defenders with tailorable state-of-the-art defense system that can maximize their ability to identify, engage, and destroy current and evolving enemy aircraft, unmanned aerial vehicles, and emerging cruise missile threats, close quote, Raytheon says on an online information page. Yeah, all of those things I think would be very valuable upgrades to NORAD at the current moment in history. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has asked for air defense systems in his request for military aid. Zelensky thanked Trudeau for the donation in a tweet Tuesday. Quote, Dear @Justin Trudeau, your true leadership is in standing for democracy and human rights has been vividly proven again, close quote, Zelensky said in the tweet. Now, they've been violating human rights code up and down the human rights chain from the international to the provincial here in Canada, but congratulations on standing up for human rights of Ukrainians on the other side of the world. Not that that is your job that you get paid to do. Close quotes. Quote, thank you for helping us to protect our sky. NASAMS procured for us by Canada will be a strong shield for our cities and citizens, close quote. Anand said she spoke with her Ukrainian counterpart, Oleksiy Reznikov, earlier Tuesday about Ukraine's defense needs. Quote, I spoke with Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov this morning and heard it directly. Air defense systems in Ukraine's top priority, close quote, Anand said in a tweet. Quote, that's why Canada is purchasing a national air surface-to-air missile system from the United States to donate to Ukraine. Anand said in a follow-up tweet that this is the first air defense system Canada has purchased for Ukraine. Quote, in the face of Russia's brutal airstrikes on Ukraine, this air defense system will help to protect Ukrainian population centers and critical infrastructure against drone, missile, and aircraft attacks, she said. In November of last year, the United States government awarded Raytheon a $1.2 billion contract to supply Ukraine with 6 NASAMS units. Canada has provided over $3.4 billion in military to humanitarian aid to Ukraine since Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an intensified invasion of the country in February of 2022. And I was just thinking about Joe Rogan's interview that he did with Peter Zion there a few days ago, and he had an interesting take. Like I said, I think he leans left a little bit there, and he was sort of pro-Ukraine war. He had a couple of interesting takes on it in terms of strategic value to Russia and the West and the potential for war in Poland that could go thermonuclear. I thought they were all really good points, so I'll plug for that again to go out and maybe get a decent take on the other side of this argument. And I understand all of that, but at the same time, that's always been the story of Russia. Like it doesn't have very good land. They don't have a lot of like farmable land and stuff like that. And it kind of focuses on border control and expanding its borders. The story of Russia is the story of trying to get to the sea because, you know, all they really have access to is the Arctic. And that's why Turkey's always been of strategic importance to who are we again? We're the to NATO. That's why Turkey's always been of strategic importance there, because they have a couple of waterways that connect the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. Is it the Black Sea? Anyway, if they were pulled into the orbit of Russia, then they could have direct access to the Mediterranean, and of course, that has always been kind of the territory of the West. That was the ancient Roman Empire. It kind of surrounded the Mediterranean. And that could be trouble for NATO countries, right? So Alexandra Shinsky, national president for the Ukrainian Congress, said the UCC welcomes the purchase. Quote, assisting Ukraine with the weapons Ukraine requires to defeat Russia is the best investment in the future peace, stability, and prosperity of all of Europe. Okay, so I think we get the idea. This is what the propaganda is saying right now. I don't think I need to beat that one over the head. So that's what they're putting out there. And here we have somebody on the other side here, the Toronto Sun, tending to be right-leaning, of course. Well, you know, they're more like controlled opposition. But Canada buys surface-to-air missile systems for Ukraine, Trudeau. I mean that in the sense that culturally speaking, like they're city slickers for the most part. So a mobile surface-to-air missile system, the K2-12 Cub, is displayed during a defense fair in Belgrade, Serbia, Tuesday, June 23, 2015. So this is the picture of the system that we're sending there. So, or no, I don't. Maybe it's just an example of a surface-to-air missile system. So, Ottawa, Canada. Canada is buying a U.S. surface-to-air missile system for Ukraine nearly a year after Russia's invasion of the country began. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau informed U.S. President Joe Biden of the purchase on the sidelines of North America's Leaders Summit in Mexico City on Tuesday. Trudeau's office said the move would involve buying an American-made national advanced surface-to-air missile system. Defense Minister Anita Annan's office said it will cost $406 million and is, quote, the first Canadian donation of air defense systems to Ukraine, close quote. The money systems for the $500 million Trudeau announced in military aid for Ukraine last November during the G20 summit in Indonesia. The decision to send this type of equipment comes in response to intensified Russian air raids on cities, military sites, and critical infrastructure, such as power stations. Surface-to-air missile systems can protect against drone, missile, and aircraft strikes, aircraft attacks, quote, with a high success rate, close quote, Annan's office said in a news release. In the past month, the U.S. and Germany both announced plans to send Ukraine such systems, while France has pledged tanks. Ukraine Foreign Affairs Minister Dmytro Kuleba said Monday that his country welcomed the recent aid, saying it would help ward off Russia and bring about peace sooner. Moscow, which started the war in Ukraine last February, has decried the military aid as provocation aimed at weakening Russia's sway in the world. So, a little bit more of a balanced take on it there, but I'm not seeing any opposition to the war effort here currently underway. Okay, and here's a tweet from Greg Valentino, and he says Trump called out Biden's corruption with Zelensky sitting right next to him. So just a little history lesson here from the greatest of all boomers, Donald Trump.
The corruption's massive. Now, when Biden's son walks away with millions of dollars from Ukraine and he knows nothing, and they're paying him millions of dollars, that's corruption. When Biden's son walks out of China with $1.5 billion in a fund, and the biggest funds in the world can't get money out of China, and he's there for one quick meeting and he flies in on Air Force Two, I think that's a horrible thing. I think it's a horrible. The corruption's massive. Now, when
So speaking of radical candor, there is one of the masters, Donald Trump. I don't know. I think Elon Musk might actually be better at Twitter than he is. But Well, maybe that remains to be seen. Okay, and here's Tucker Carlson. He says media outlets, often under direct pressure from the government, suppress news stories. The effect of this arrangement, and by the way, it's intended to affect, it's the intended effect, is to leave the population of the United States dangerously ignorant on questions that affect their lives.
150,000 people have died in this war so far. How many? It's funny how huge history-altering events can take place in this country and around the world, and most people seem to have no idea they happened. It's not that Americans are stupid, it's that our media outlets, often under direct pressure from the U.S. government, suppress those stories, the stories that matter. The effect of this arrangement, and by the way, it's the intended effect, is to leave the population of the United States dangerously ignorant. Probably not. Both have been effectively blindfolded by...
I thought that was weird the first time I watched it. It seems like there's an edit there or something. Maybe it's just paranoia, but you know, I'm always noticing these things these days.
Information monopolies. And if you doubt that's true, ask your neighbors who's winning the war in Ukraine. And of course, they'll tell you that Ukraine is winning. Duh. That's what they've seen on the Today Show every morning for the past 11 months. And not just on the Today Show, but on virtually every media outlet in America, apart from Colonel Doug McGregor's appearances on this show, for which he has, needless to say, been condemned as an agent of Putin. But he's pretty much alone. Here's the version that most Americans see.
President Zelensky described the time as the beginning of the end of the war. Does he have that right?
Well, I think it's clear that Ukraine is winning.
The Ukrainians are on the offensive. They're winning this war right now. Why would you want to stop supporting the Ukrainians when they are winning on the battlefield?
Ukraine is winning, but they haven't won, and Russia is losing, but they have not lost.
Right now, I think it's fair to say Ukraine has the upper hand. Ukraine is winning its war thanks to the enormous support we and others have provided, and we need to keep the pressure on Putin.
Well, that was just last month. I think it's clear that Ukraine is winning, says defense contractor Barry McCaffrey, with what sounds like hard-earned authority. Ukraine is winning, says Michael McFaul of Stanford University. Ukraine is winning, says Hillary Clinton. Ukraine is winning, proclaimed the entire American media establishment. And anyone who suggests otherwise must be working for Russia. That's what they've been telling you relentlessly because they want you to think we're on the winning team. And most Americans believe them because how could they know otherwise? They don't have sources in Ukraine. So you can imagine the shock that Washington Post readers must have experienced this weekend when they read the op-ed by Robert Gates and Condoleezza Rice. Now, if you were trying to locate the two most thoroughly discredited figures in the American foreign policy establishment, you'd probably pick Bob Gates and Condi Rice, because few have done more to weaken this country. But again, most Americans don't know that because the media would never say that, ever, because Gates and Rice are paid-up members of the club. And Gates and Rice want you to know in their op-ed in the Post that Ukraine is losing badly. In fact, they write, unless the U.S. continues to prop up Ukraine's military and economy forever and fight Russia directly, that country will collapse and Putin could invade Malibu. Here we're quoting directly. Ukraine's economy is in a shambles. Millions of its people have fled. Its infrastructure is being destroyed, and much of its mineral wealth, industrial capacity, and considerable agricultural land are under Russian control. Ukraine's military capability and economy are now entirely dependent on lifelines from the West, primarily the United States. End quote. Wait, what? Isn't that the opposite, the direct opposite of what you just saw, of what they've been telling all of us until, say, last week? Indeed, it is the opposite. Shouldn't we have known these facts, before Mitch McConnell signed off on yet another multi-billion-dollar aid package to Zelensky and his wife? Yep, we should have known, but there was no way to know because the media wouldn't tell us. And they wouldn't tell us because they're controlled. And Ukraine is not the only war they have been lying about. How about Mexico? There's a full-blown...
So before kind of Tucker goes into this next segment on Mexico, I'm reading some of the comments, and yeah, I think the theme of these last few clips is pretty clear, right? Like you can see the transition from our controlled media to the foreign media. You know, when you show the CBC, it's obviously pro-war, and the best you're going to get from a purportedly right-wing news outlet like The Sun is something balanced right down the center. But if you want to get the other side of the story, as in the argument against the war effort, you have to go to foreign media and maybe some independent media in Canada. Rebel News is been coming out pretty hard against the Ukraine war effort.
Blown civil war underway tonight 100 yards from San Diego. The Mexican government has lost control of parts of its own country to the armies of the drug cartels, which are now powerful enough to threaten commercial air travel in Mexico. At least 150,000 people have died in this war so far. How many is that? Well, that's more than twice the number of deaths that the U.S. suffered during the entire Vietnam War. Did you know that? You probably didn't, because our media never mention it. But here's video from Mexico shot in just the past few days. So that's Mexico. Keep in mind, we share a nearly 2,000-mile-long border with the country you just saw. So you don't have to be Robert Gates or Barry McCaffrey or some other august foreign policy mandarin to wonder, if that's happening there right now, why won't it spill over into the United States? And of course, needless to say, it will spill over into the United States. And why wouldn't it? There's no border left. Shouldn't Americans know that? Yes, they should. But most have no idea because the media won't tell them. Joe Biden, the president of the United States, went to the border yesterday, and there was no mention of the civil war right across the river. That's not just weird, it's scary. And it's just the beginning of the deception from your media. Ending the use of fossil fuels is the #1 domestic priority of the Democratic Party and of the White House that leads that party. So how is this new green utopia going to work exactly? We don't have to guess at that. It's already happening in Europe, and the result has been, let's see, mass poverty and social unrest. Within the last week, there have been enormous protests in Paris, the capital of Europe, against a government that cares more about global warming theology than about the lives of its children.
So, yeah, and I wanted to throw a couple of comments up here. Again, so this ties in with a lot of other stuff that I've been saying on the channel about Fortress North America. That's kind of the strategy, I think, right now to stem the tide of global tyranny. Yeah, I mean, we have free trade agreements here in North America between our three countries, and we've been pointing out, as Tucker has been pointing out, that the cost of labor well, no, wait a second, who was that? That was Peter Zion was pointing out on the Joe Rogan podcast that the cost of labor, which is more technologically adept than Chinese labor manufacturing, it's more modernized, it's more technologically adept in Mexico, and it's 1/3 the cost. So why aren't we investing in our neighbors? And if you really want to fire up the war machine, why don't you drive the cartels out of Mexico? And you know, then and maybe go after Cuba while we're at it. But yeah, I mean, that was always kind of the vision from the Americans back in the day, was they weren't going to allow communism to get a foothold into the Western Hemisphere. And well, what can I say? Through a long history of half measures, I think we have this situation that we're in right now, where I think more and more people are waking up to the threat. You know, it's always been the case that the world is at war. That is just kind of a part of life. And at this moment in our history, at this stage of the development of the species, it's a question of management. You know, we need to stem the tide of global tyranny. That is the default setting for the human species, is tyranny. We're a tribal species that show fealty to our elders by default. And this is just kind of something we have to overcome at this stage of our conscious awareness, I guess. So Patty is commenting. 2 times I got this snap and I lose the connection. Why a lot of Facebook am I doing wrong? And anyone else getting this? I have been getting that comment quite a bit. People don't seem to be getting notifications about our live streams on Facebook. We haven't been able to get the metrics from our channel for a while. Like we're trying to get some metrics, viewership metrics and things like that, so we can better understand engagement, and they're not available to us in the detail that they once were. So Facebook, we always knew what they were really like, and that they were going to come for us eventually. And it's kind of a slow creep, I think, is the strategy. Constrict the flow of information so slowly that maybe we don't notice. But the strategy now, as it always really has been from the beginning, is to promote the Rumble channel. So it's just Veterans for Freedom on Rumble, guys. I've been trying to push the live streams there a little bit more now, and just use the controlled platforms to draw audiences. And we always knew it was going to come to this. So let's just adapt and overcome, and try to get everybody migrated over onto the Rumble channel. Okay. Now, here we have Harrison Faulkner, and he's True North, I believe. Yeah, True North. So Justin Trudeau says, quote, Canada is pleased to see Mexico and the United States take steps toward building more diverse, equal, and inclusive society. Oh, God. Painful, but here we go. Trudeau warning.
Canada is pleased to have our Mexican and American friends committed so strongly to protecting clean air, clean water, and a brighter future. Canada is also pleased to see all 3 countries take steps towards building a more diverse, equal, and inclusive society. A society where there is opportunity for everyone, where women and girls are politically and economically empowered, including Indigenous women and girls, where the benefits of growth are felt by workers and families across the economy. By doing this, we create a more stable, prosperous, and equal future. And we build economies that work for all North Americans. We made progress on a lot of different things today. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and as North American leaders, we recognize the roles our countries play in being a source of stability and security, not just in the region, but around the world.
Okay, guys. Mother of the Drummers is giving a lot of puke emojis and saying, please, Jeff, no more torture. Yeah, I should try to limit the Trudeau clips. I mean, I do. He has the same effect on me, if not more so. So I empathize. Okay, here's Al Jazeera. I like to just kind of pull in all kinds of different sources like this. And Al Jazeera is a propaganda outlet. They're basically like the CBC model. They're the state propaganda outlet for Qatar, and they have freedom to kind of cover the topics that they want to cover in the ways that they want to cover them, but basically within certain parameters that are unofficially set out for them by the government of Qatar, and whenever the government reaches out to them, they kind of have to do what they want. So they're basically the CBC of Qatar. North American leaders to cooperate on semiconductors. Going into the Three Amigos Summit, U.S., Canada, Mexico also pledges new cooperation on migration, climate, and drugs, White House says. The White House has announced a series of pledges made with Mexico and Canada ahead of the Three Amigos Summit, and cooperation on bolstering the supply of semiconductors, a market currently dominated by Asia, topped the list. That would be a really positive thing, I think, if we could bring our manufacturing back over here to North America. And, you know, I'm always asking the rhetorical question, why did all the manufacturing go there when we have these other partners like we have Mexico here domestically? And if you want to tap into the Asian markets, you could have set up somebody like India, you know, who are pro-Western, democratic, English-speaking, much better partners, obviously, than China. And the answer to the rhetorical question, of course, is CCP influence. So just look up the Sidewinder report. It's a Government of Canada report that came out back in the 90s, talked all about how the Chinese Communist Party was very busy at work, co-opting our institutions through bribery, blackmail, installing their own people, leveraging the student population, through the Confucius institutions that they've set up globally in our universities. And now we see them, opening their own police forces in Canada and also training troops here. So it's been a gradual escalation. It's like a slow trap, that it closes slow. And as it gets tighter, it's going to be harder and harder to kind of claw our way out of it. But it is, again, a matter of demographics. So it's only temporary, folks. The announcement on Tuesday came hours before U.S. President Joe Biden, Mexican President Manuel Lopez Obrador, and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau were to meet for the 10th North American Leaders Summit in Mexico City. It also included a new agreement on addressing the climate change and updating strategy for dealing with drug smuggling and modest new measures aimed at stemming the region's worsening migrant crisis. Hours before Tuesday's summit, Biden met one-on-one with Trudeau. On Monday, Biden and Lopez Obrador held talks in which they discussed strengthening economic ties, fighting the illegal drug trade, and reducing migration, the White House said. Quote, this is a relationship which is a fraternal relationship of friendship between our two peoples, Lopez Obrador said ahead of the meeting on Monday, striking a warm tone despite the left-wing leader's generally cool approach to Mexico's northern neighbors since taking office in 2018. After hailing Biden as a, quote, humanistic president, a visionary president, close quote, Lopez Obrador called on him to, quote, turn away from this abandonment, this disdain, and this forgetfulness for Latin America and the Caribbean, close quote. He added that Biden holds the key to greater, quote, economic, social integration, close quote, and a wider pivot away from regional reliance on Asian manufacturing. And this abandonment of Latin America and the Caribbean, like they've been waging proxy wars down there, all through the Reagan administration. Well, they sponsored the Chilean coup, which was a bloody one. But Chile is better off now than anybody else. So I don't know what to make of that, really, on balance. And also, they take a lot of heat for doing that. And if they want really to really get on that life raft that is the United States, then they could transfer their territory to them, like Puerto Rico did. And Puerto Rico doesn't have statehood yet, but they transferred their territory to the United States, so they get all their, disaster relief and defense from them and stuff like that. So that's always been the case. They have territories, Guam, all over the place, globally. Hawaii, like you can do that. You can apply for statehood in the United States. So that's always been an option. You just got to pay them. You got to pay them taxes. Biden, meanwhile, said the duo would address, quote, strengthening our supply chains, close quote, while stressing the need to combat fentanyl smuggling, which has fueled an addiction crisis in the U.S. and an increase in migrants and asylum seekers crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. But both are politically fraught issues in the U.S. In turn, the U.S. leader also pointed to the billions of dollars that Washington spends in foreign aid around the world, saying that, quote, unfortunately, our responsibility just doesn't end in the Western Hemisphere, close quote. In joint statements, well, actually it does, because your responsibility is to your tax base, the people that pay you. Your primary responsibility. We all feel a responsibility for our fellow humans, but we shouldn't let an emotional attachment to that responsibility drive us to implode our own life rafts in an effort to float the entire world. It's a matter of teaching a man to fish, not giving him a fish. In joint statements before their bilateral meeting, Trudeau and Biden also said the North American leaders would also focus on efforts to stabilize crisis hit Haiti during the meeting. Quote, as we talk about issues, whether it's Haiti, whether it's some of the challenges in South America, whether we talk about critical minerals and energy and how we're going to move to create those efficient and resilient supply chains that we need, there's a lot that we're going to be able to do together. Close quote, Trudeau said. Okay, so pledges on semiconductors, drug smuggling, migration. So this is all pretty positive stuff that I want to highlight. Like it's not all bleak out there in the world today, guys. We have some really hard battles to win ahead of us, but there's a lot of I see like some promising developments. There's starting to be some recognition for the true state of the world today. There's enough pressure on the highest levels of leadership at this point. I think that they're at least bringing some sensible measures to the table geopolitically. Okay, here we go. Here's onto the COVID-19 part of it here. And we haven't been streaming to the V4F YouTube channel for a while because we keep getting strikes there. I think we're still banned. Somebody was asking about that recently. I think we're still on a ban. Usually I would drop the YouTube at this point because we're still trying to get our message out here and they're not making it easy at this point. So here we go.
Stay at home. That is the order tonight.
Stay home. When COVID hit, experts were quick to tell us exactly what to do.
Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands.
Turns out washing our hands doesn't protect us, but being outdoors does. At the beginning of the pandemic, experts told us, stay home, close schools, don't wear masks, do wear masks, disinfect countertops.
How to clean and disinfect your home.
Now, 3 years later, we can say who was right and who was wrong.
In Florida, the pandemic is raging.
The media got a lot wrong. They repeatedly trashed Florida's governor for lifting lockdowns.
Governor DeSantis is just acting irresponsibly.
While praising New York's governor.
Governor Cuomo is doing an amazing job.
I'm wowed by what you did. The governor's brother gushed over New York's lockdowns and sneered at Florida's reopening.
That's why states like Florida are in such dire straits.
But Florida wasn't in dire straits. Florida and New York had about the same number of deaths. And if you take age into account, Florida has more old people. Florida did better than New York. In general, 3 years later, we see little difference between states that opened up and those that didn't. In fact, the states with the fewest deaths are liberal Vermont and conservative Utah. Around the world, the experts and the media were just as wrong.
Sweden's failed experiment. How their dangerous COVID gamble went wrong.
Reporters trashed Sweden.
Officials made the decision not to lock down, hoping it would lead to widespread immunity. But cases are surging.
Cases were surging then, deaths too. But allowing people to develop immunity did pay off. Sweden ultimately did better than its neighbors. In fact, Sweden has had fewer excess deaths than most other countries, says the OECD. Did you hear about that from American media that trashed Sweden? I didn't think so. Excess deaths, say researchers, deaths above the pre-COVID average. That's the best way to compare countries' COVID experience. It's because some countries undercount COVID.
A huge gap between reported deaths and COVID deaths.
India reported fewer than 1 million deaths, but there were probably many more because there were 5 million excess deaths in India. Former Soviet countries undercounted too. The dictator of Belarus played hockey and said his country was COVID-free. Belarus and other former Soviet states claimed they did well. But excess death data show they did terribly. Maxim Lott maps this data and posts it at the website Maximum Truth. His COVID fudge factor reveals the communist culture of hiding the truth is alive and well. Here's the excess death data for the whole world. The dark-shaded countries like Russia, Bulgaria, and Peru did worst. Countries in gray mean there wasn't enough reliable data. Lighter places like Mongolia and Kenya did very well. I was surprised to see that Kenya and Togo and Sub-Saharan Africa did well. Surprised because Africa has low vaccination rates and less high-quality medical care. Lot says it's probably because their population's so young. COVID rarely harms young people. What does the data say about countries like Australia, places that impose brutal lockdowns?
For anyone who breaches quarantine, they face fines and even jail. The penalties ranging from as much as $50,000 in WA and 12 months behind bars.
Australia's rigid rules did save lives, partly because the island sealed its borders, banning almost all travel. For 2 years, there was little COVID in Australia. But once almost every Australian was vaccinated, the government lifted its lockdown. COVID cases soared. Population adjusted. Australia now has had more COVID cases than the US, but far fewer deaths, partly because when Australia stopped its lockdown, Omicron was circulating, and the Omicron strain is less deadly. Were Australia's strict lockdowns worth it?
You are bending my arm backwards.
The average Australian lived 2 weeks longer because the country's strict rules limited COVID spread. But would you want to deal with Australia's authoritarian lockdown to live 2 weeks longer? I wouldn't. And it turns out people in China don't want that either.
They're chanting that they don't want COVID tests. They want freedom.
Protesting's illegal in China, so these people risked their lives. Here, factory workers threw barricades at security guards in white hazmat suits. The workers have been forced to stay inside an iPhone factory for weeks to keep them safe from COVID. After the protests,
China did a U-turn and lifted most of its severe COVID rules.
What can America learn from all this? We now know that draconian lockdowns can save lives, but lockdowns hurt people financially. New York lost 400,000 jobs since the start of the pandemic. Florida gained 400,000. Also, kids in lockdown states suffered. Obesity increased in New York by 5 percentage points, just because New York kept schools closed. Well, in Florida, where schools reopened sooner, obesity actually fell a little. Kids' education suffered an historic setback.
Scores decreased by the largest amount ever recorded.
In Sweden, which never closed its primary schools, kids suffered no learning loss. I get that we know more now. 3 years ago, terrified politicians just wanted to do something. But next pandemic, I wish they'd be a little humble, except that they don't know everything. All of us have different values about safety versus freedom. Life's better when we individuals get to make our own decisions. You get to make your own decisions about what you watch. Glad you decided to watch this video. If you like our videos, please click that button. Help us make more.
So yeah, that's John Stossel there. He's always been a gem in the media, in my life anyway. He's a great boomer. And what I find his strategy seems to be, and maybe this is the mark of one of the Obi-Wan figures in our current fourth turning, but you know, he uses these soft tones all the time. It's like, you know, it's okay. I'm not saying that you're not special and that everything's not fine and everything. Like it's the way that he speaks. It's his delivery, and that was kind of my experience, I think, with my superiors in the military with the boomer hegemony. Is that it's not so much what you're saying as it is how you say it, and you can basically say anything if you just say it the right way. So. Yeah, I've always been kind of a fan of John Stossel for that. Good job. Okay, so the Twitter files are still going. The Pfizer board member, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, flag tweets questioning COVID vaccines. So this, you know, we're getting a little bit late in the program here, but I just wanted to give a quick highlight that this is still coming out. The Twitter files are all over the media and social media and stuff like that, and it's everything that people were accusing Twitter of doing, and then some. And Elon Musk has already been on this program and quoted, not personally, in person, but I showed a clip of him saying, "Yeah, I mean, we haven't come across a Twitter conspiracy yet that hasn't been proven true, essentially. So here we go. The latest Twitter files involving the tech giant's response to the pandemic puts a focus on Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former FDA commissioner and sitting board member of prominent COVID vaccine manufacturer Pfizer. Alex Berenson, a vocal COVID contrarian, whose past commentary on the vaccine has received scorn by critics and praised by fans, was latest to be granted access to Elon Musk's Twitter files, publishing his findings in his, quote, unreported truths, quote, Substack newsletter. Berenson shared an August 2021 email Gottlieb sent Twitter's senior public policy manager, Todd O'Boyle, flagging a tweet written by former Trump administration official Dr. Brett Giroir, who had written, quote, it's now clear, hashtag COVID-19 natural immunity is superior to, quote, vaccine immunity by a lot. There's no scientific justification for hashtag vax proof if a person had prior infection. That has been my position since before they called the pandemic. I mean, I had that thing in January of 2020. As far as I'm concerned, I haven't been sick since. Not a cold or a sniffle, nothing. And everybody around me has been sick. And as I've said in the past, I think there's been some immunosuppression due to the vaccination, the jab. And it seems like, you know, a lot of the deaths related to it are, first of all, if you're going to have a bad reaction to it, you're probably going to have it on the first one. So that's why we see a concentration of deaths on the first one. But then later on, we see this kind of immunosuppression that leads to more COVID deaths and serious illness due to like colds are keeping people out of commission for days now. And I'm still just kind of walking around going, no, you know, I'm good. My natural immunity is protecting me. But that's anecdotal, of course. And we do get into the statistics, but I don't have them here with me today. Quote, this is the kind of stuff that's corrosive, close quote, Gottlieb told O'Boyle. Quote, here he draws a sweeping conclusion of a single retrospective study in Israel that hasn't been peer reviewed, but this tweet will go up, going viral and driving news coverage, close quote. And the peer reviewed process has been completely, like they've immolated their credibility with the Lancet even publishing what we now know was a Fauci orchestrated letter in promoting the mRNA jab. So according to Berenson, O'Boyle's forward and Gottlieb's email and Twitter's, quote, strategic response, close quote, team writing, quote, please see this report from the former FDA commissioner, close quote. Giroir's tweet was later slapped with a, quote, misleading, close quote, label and blocked by any ability to like or share the tweet, telling Twitter users, quote, learn why health officials recommend a vaccine for most people, close quote. God. It's because it's getting people rich. Gottlieb, a CNBC contributor who was a prominent media pundit in the height of the pandemic, flagged another tweet in September 2021 from the Substack writer and COVID policy critic Justin Hart, which read, quote, sticks and stones may break my bones, but a viral pathogen with a child mortality rate of approximately 0% has cost our children nearly 3 years of schooling, close quote. And that's just it. That's what they didn't do. They didn't do the cost benefit analysis of any of this stuff. It's about selecting the least harmful option. That's what ethics is all about. You know, some harm is going to result no matter what you do in these kind of life or death, real life situations. And your task, ethically speaking, is to select the least harmful option. And they did not do that. It was all about being seen to do things and getting people rich. So, quote, why Gottlieb objected to Hart's words is not clear, but the Pfizer shot would soon be approved for children 5 to 11, representing another massive market for Pfizer if parents could be convinced COVID was a real threat to their kids, close quote, Berenson wrote. Berenson noted that this reports that Gottlieb has also targeted him for days before he was permanently suspended from Twitter. Brackets, Berenson was later reinstated in July 2022 after a legal battle with the tech giant. In August 2021, in the August 2021 tweet, Gottlieb flagged Berenson was critical of Dr. Anthony Fauci. Quote, this is what's promoted on Twitter. This is why Tony needs a security detail, close quote, Gottlieb told Twitter at the time. Okay, so that's I think that's good enough for that article there, but you guys get the idea. We're still tracking this Twitter files thing. Like Twitter was co-opted as a propaganda machine, a psyop, an influence operation by the deep state in the U.S. And they're showing now, like, everything's coming out of these direct connections between the FBI. Like, there were tons of ex-FBI agents working at Twitter. They have absolutely no reason to be there. And this is how they kind of keep things at arm's distance, and it's about influence. Anyway, it's a great thing, I think, that Elon Musk has done by purchasing Twitter, and it's not even a corporation anymore. It's a sole proprietorship. Like, he owns it. So he's doing a pretty good job, I think, cleaning everything up, and it's a great service to the rest of us so far. Okay, Pfizer board member Scott Gottlieb leaned on Twitter to censor tweets which argued against the vaccine passports and claimed natural immunity was stronger than the shot. Latest Twitter files don't reveal. So I like the Daily Mail. Like I always say, I'm not really a regular reader of any of the stuff that I show here. But Daily Mail, I like the way they always have a good summary of what the article is really about in the headline. It's never seems to be misleading, and they give you these bullet points here too that you can just kind of hit really quick and decide whether or not you want to read the article. So I find it's a pretty good publication. Controversial reporter Alex Berenson made the claim that the latest Twitter files. In the latest Twitter files, the former FDA head Scott Gottlieb wanted to quash a tweet critical of Pfizer's shots. Berenson notes that Gottlieb, a Pfizer stakeholder, did so for financial benefit. So it's just kind of a recapitulation of what we've seen in the previous article. And here's the tweet from Brett Giroir. It's now clear that hashtag COVID-19 natural immunity is superior to hashtag vaccine immunity by a lot. So same thing that we saw before, just kind of reinforcing what's coming out here from the Twitter files. So this is a question that I've been asking on the podcast previously. I talk about the Rex study. It's a study in chickens using mRNA vaccines, where Dr. Marek was trying out some mRNA vaxes, and then what ended up happening is, because what they do is they kind of suppress the symptoms, but not necessarily the disease. Well, the symptoms, I guess, but not necessarily the virus. But what ends up happening is they incubate variants. And that was the thing I always said from the beginning, is it's like, okay, with the mRNA jab and the spike protein, we're really just peaking the immunoresponse to that single protein that we know to be effective at bonding with the ACE2 receptor. But once it mutates one time and finds another keyhole into the cell, it only takes one mutation, and then that vaccine is obsolete. They kept pushing it, even after it became obsolete with the variants. But we keep seeing, now what are we up to now? The Kraken variant and all this stuff. It's just ridiculous. They're mutations. This is what viruses do, is they mutate. But in the Marek study, what happened is the mutations kept incubating in the vaccinated population until they got a variant that was as deadly as Ebola, but airborne. So that's kind of the extinction event that this vax has provided us with the potential to see. But anyway, I don't want to be alarmist about it or anything like that, but this does seem to be a very valid question to be asking. And this is the Wall Street Journal, so pretty mainstream publication. Historically, they're supposed to be a little bit more right-leaning, but over the last few years, we've kind of seen them fail to kind of meet their own expectations, but still they tend to be a little bit more on the no BS side of things. So our vaccines fueling new COVID variants, the virus appears to be evolving in ways that evade immunity. Wonderful. So we're just going to read the first couple of paragraphs here, because it's a paid publication. But public health experts are sounding the alarm about a new Omicron variant dubbed XBB that is rapidly spreading across the northeastern U.S. Some studies suggest it is as different from the original COVID strain from Wuhan as the 2003 SARS virus. Should Americans be worried? So I think natural immunity clearly is the way to go at this point. And we have, doctors are forming new international bodies and publishing letters to call for the ban of these so-called vaccines. And this, I think, is a very valid concern that nobody's really talking about, well, at least until now. And that is that Marek study that it points to the idea that mRNA vaccinated populations could incubate viruses that would become deadly to the non-vaccinated population at some point. And at that point, we become completely dependent on the pharmaceutical industry to provide us with the antidotes, right? And so far, I don't even know if they have an antidote to the kind of vaccine injury that we've seen with the initial mRNA vaccine. So we'll be really screwed if we get to the point where we're dependent on those things to survive a deadly airborne virus. So, I think that's the Nova Scotia nurses stuff again. Okay, I'm back to the start of my presentation, which is the end. And I just came over the 2-hour mark there, 2 hours and 10 minutes. So I'm not doing a very good job of tightening these things up for you guys, but there's pretty complex subjects. And I always seem to have a lot of people who stick with me through the whole thing. So I think this is kind of the way to go right now. I got a lot of other stuff that I got to pull together in terms of those quick cut videos that have the potential to go viral, but getting the content out there, I think, is the strategy right now. And just educating people, as to what's going on and the kinds of things that we should be watching for when we're dealing with fifth generational warfare and the PSYOP that we're all being subjected to. So I really appreciate everybody staying with me for my long-winded presentation as usual. And till tomorrow, I'll say stay frosty and stay safe out there, troops.